Good afternoon, everybody, and my name is Sarah Lang from Infrastructure New Zealand. Welcome to our very first webinar. As many of you will know, we do run a lot of face-to-face events, over about 75 per year. So this is our first webinar. Please bear with us. There may be a few teething moments, but we're going to do our very best to share the most up-to-date information about what's going on in the infrastructure sector in response to COVID-19. Just to let you know how we're going to run today, we're going to be presenting our online survey and in-depth interviews of the industry sector leaders. We're going to be having an update on the construction sector accord, and we're going to be talking about some of our advocacy work. We of course will open for questions and answers at the end, and we hope to be finished up in about 45 minutes. So buckle on up for Infrastructure New Zealand's first webinar. I'd now like to hand over to Paul Blair for some introductory comments. Thanks for joining us. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So look, I'm well aware for our members that this is a really tense time. You're focused on your family, on your staff and your businesses. So we said last Friday that we'd try and do three things for you, that we would up our communications, that would focus on community type events like this, and that would work on our advocacy. So throughout this, what we're going to try and do is replay to you the insights that we've got, both from the surveys, but also from a lot of calls that we've been putting in to members across the industry. Just so you know, your questions that are coming in, the key questions that are coming in are around the performance of your contracts. How do you get certainty on that legally? How do you get cash and keep your businesses and your people going? How do you manage your people, and how do you keep them engaged and across the rapidly changing environment? What are we going to do around projects going forward, and what projects are there going to be going forward? Some real interesting questions around procurement and the legislative environment we might need both here and now, but also to get things going again. And finally, what is the health and safety that we need to reopen projects to make them essential services, or as we move from 4 to stage 3, what is going to be required? So I'll come back and talk to those later. Also, we've heard from you, and we've also heard right across the sector that everyone is thinking in terms of 3 horizons. So I'd encourage you to think in terms of horizon 1 being the immediate. That's really this week. That's about cash and contracts and how the industry keeps going. The second thing is that we need to have a look at the near term, and that's coming in through to around about the end of April. That's about what projects can we enhance. And the third place is really sort of the more strategic, beyond that end of April, in the new normal, in the new New Zealand, how we're going to stimulate our economy and get our people back to work. So those are the 3 horizons. Now hand over to Sarah, and she'll give you the insights from our survey.
Thanks very much, Paul. So look, everybody, over the past 2 weeks, we have been talking with our members, a cross-section from each of the segments of the infrastructure sector. We've conducted an online survey, and we've conducted in-depth telephone interviews with leaders of the infrastructure sector. What we wanted to find out was, how was the sector faring, and what do you need, what can we do to help, and what the government can do to help. So I have 2 sets of responses for you right now. Firstly, the results of the telephone in-depth surveys. So we found out that the different sectors of the infrastructure sector are being impacted to varying degrees. The construction sector is under severe pressure and requires either an immediate restart of some activity or government support. Businesses have and are looking to further rationalise staff. For the engineering, architecture, commercial, legal and other advisory professional services, they are less impacted today. They are technologically astute, and most staff can and are already working from home. Most companies in this category are in a position to survive a 1-month lockdown, but any longer or a slow restart will see a deepening crisis for this part of the industry. Public services are more challenged to work remotely. There's some concern across the private sector how essential public infrastructure services like consenting will move forward. For many sectors, there have been some reductions in pay. Some of our members are down to 4-day weeks already, and many of our members are withholding bonuses, pay rises, and dividends at present. Although some companies are reducing staff hours, there's little evidence of widespread layoffs at this point in time. All sectors are challenged by the high degree of uncertainty. They really need clarity over what projects may restart and when. Many parts of the sector are weakened by 2 years of political challenge, so they are not as resilient as they might like to be. New Zealand's infrastructure sector is heavily dependent upon international skills, expertise and labour. There is a concern that these skills will not be accessible any longer or will rapidly migrate away once restrictions are lifted if there is not a clear and committed pipeline forward. There is a concern that the government's economic support package has not been well tailored to the infrastructure sector yet. There is very strong support and recognition of efforts by government departments and banks to pay bills quickly and to support cash flow. There is no clear and immediate evidence of supply chain failure yet, but the industry is increasingly concerned about its ability to source key inputs. There is widespread uncertainty around who pays when contracts cannot be met due to COVID-19. There is increasing concern that clients will not be able to pay for completed work. And there is support for alliance contracting moving forward. Commercial competitors, clients and suppliers are generally working cooperatively with patience and understanding. So those are the themes from our in-depth online survey. We're now moving, interview survey, but we're now moving to the results of our online survey, which we mentioned in the press release today. As you'll see, we asked our respondents what impact COVID-19 was having on their organisation. We have segmented the results by sector. So for the contracting and construction sector, COVID-19 is having an immediate, very negative impact. You'll see the rest of the sector is also experiencing a negative impact. And at present, there are very few organisations who are unimpacted by COVID-19. We then asked our informants about their labour force, and as you will see there is a very clear immediate impact on the contracting and construction labour force. Because many of these workers are not able to work remotely or are not able to work from home, there are significant impacts on their work right now. The longer term impacts are going to be felt strongly by the professional advisory services, so out to 6 months. And as you'll see, people hope things will start improving in about a year's time. Equally, we asked our members what their profits were doing, and this is very serious for the contracting and construction side of the infrastructure industry. Many others feel that they can survive at least a month lockdown, but much longer things start to get critical for many parts of the infrastructure sector. When did our members expect business conditions to return to normal? As you will see there, it's really looking at a 12-month return to normal. And for some people, we're never going to return to normal. Business as usual has changed forever. How did our members rate the government's response to date? Overall, our members felt it was good, as you will see there. However, we do have calls for some immediate support packages for the infrastructure sector. So that's it for me. I'm now going to hand back to Paul, who's going to detail some of the sectors or some of Infrastructure New Zealand's advocacy initiatives. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, Sarah. So we've got a great advantage in the infrastructure sector, certainly for the construction subsector that we've highlighted as one of the most immediately impacted sectors. The construction sector accord is already there as a joint effort between 7 government ministers and their various departments and the industry. There's a set of agreed behaviours. So that collaborative partnership is working very well. We have recently joined the reference group for that. So I just wanted to give you an idea so that you know where to direct your inquiries to, sort of who's at that table and what we are contributing to. So in addition to the Construction Accord members, Engineering New Zealand, the unions via Air2, Mark Binns, who is the chair of Crown Infrastructure Partners, is there. I will come back to that. MB, HUD, the Property Council, Master Builders, Ministry of Ed, local government, architects, Kiwi Rail, etc. So a really broad swathe. And what we've heard from members is that they're not actually sure who to talk to. So my encouragement would be to talk to us or to go to your professional body rather than going directly to ministers. At the moment, government is quite rightly focused on this week, and so go through those funnels, because our observation is that government is working really positively. They are listening to the industry and they're looking to react. Our advocacy there has been about what are the conditions that would be necessary for higher health and safety, what is an essential service, what's happening globally. And so we've done some global benchmarking, which we're making available to a substream of the Construction Accord. We're looking at what places like Singapore, for example, is doing in bringing technology, hygiene measures, split shifts, etc. to bear. And we're providing that so that this cross-sectoral group can figure out what would be required to balance health and safety in our new world with the need to get back to work. So we're doing that. There is a huge amount that our members are worried about in the contractual world. We hear from our members who are lawyers, and we hear from our members who are service providers to this industry, that building contract 3910, which does not include a force majeure event, is a real problem, because if you don't have a force majeure event, how do you claim for costs and get cash going? So the Construction Accord is well across these issues, and government are actively working on it. I can't say anything further other than our advocacy has been for a close look at what the UK has done. The UK has effectively said that they will pay to 80% of the previous contractual value. They've put out a broad statement saying that the industry should be supported, that the supply chain should be further supported through those contracts, and where there is any doubt, that the benefit of doubt should be for continuation. So a very strong and very clear statement. That is what we're advocating for, something that looks like that, so that the comms are as clear as the comms have been around stage 4, and then we can sweep up anything that doesn't fit in underneath that. Our members have a very strong support for the lockdown, but the quid pro quo for that is about supporting the cash flow that needs to make sure that businesses and workers stay whole. We're in a very fortunate position, and a number of people have said this, that the infrastructure industry is not in the straits that, for example, tourism might find itself in. There will be, we believe, an infrastructure response. We believe that there will be more infrastructure projects, and we'll have to get those out quickly and change the way that we currently work in order to do that. Uncertainty in terms of comms, we are starting to do initiatives such as this, and we would encourage you to come to us if you have any questions, so that we can funnel them in appropriately, and so that the government can receive them from a broad range of people, but through a few sources, not many sources. And a final piece, relationships and behaviours are really critical in a time like this. So we've got to remember that we all are in this together, and we need to perform and behave really well. Our actions as we go through crisis events like this will be remembered for a very long time. So I'd encourage you to lean on those relationships and to over-communicate in these times, and to make sure that you're doing the right thing there. We've had some concerns that infrastructure is just horizontal infrastructure, and what about the rest of the sectors? So construction is around about 38 billion. Horizontal infrastructure is only about 8 of that. Vertical infrastructure is well within the sights of the construction accord. It's a lot more private sector focused, and there are difficulties there. It is also more complex. So that is an issue that is being considered, and members of the construction accord have been quite public about that as well. The further sector is there's around about 22 billion in the residential construction sector. So that is much smaller SMEs. So we're well aware that this is not about just the big end of town. This is about making sure that whether through social procurement from government agencies down through the supply chain, that smaller operators and people in regions are getting a fair deal out of this as well. So that is well in their sights. I think in terms of response, we put out a media statement after the initial package, and the theme of that really was do not waste a good crisis. So in New Zealand, we've been unfortunate enough to have the Christchurch and Kaikoura earthquake events. I think a lot of those lessons have been learned and are being listened to at the government level. So we think that some of the things that started in Christchurch around, for example, the Skirt Alliance, and then moved on to Kaikoura and the Nectar or North Canterbury Transport Recovery Alliance are really important. So the features there were that the RMA or the Resource Management Act was relaxed, but the quid pro quo for that was enhanced and wide community engagement at speed. And so that worked particularly well, that all voices were heard and we got money flowing and contracts going within a very small matter of months. We think that the open book alliancing that was seen in Nectar is really, really important. And that is a cross-sector focus with everyone at the table. It doesn't involve the sort of procurement that we have at the moment. So it involves setting a set margin for that sort of project, then having an open book approach where risk and benefit is shared equally both ways. So it's a partnership model, and those sorts of models are going to be required going forward if we need to move at pace. Procurement is a real focus, and that is being actively talked about. People should just be aware, though, that in that 3 horizons sort of thing that we're talking about, the first horizon is making sure that people are safe and have cash to keep their businesses going. The second phase, as I mentioned before, Crown infrastructure partners have put up on their website that they're calling for the industry to look at projects that might be able to be accelerated. Please look at the Crown infrastructure website for that. That is aiming at projects to come in to them within the next sort of 4 weeks. And that's about projects that can start in the next 180 days. Where Infrastructure New Zealand and a bunch of other people will be focused as well is keeping an eye on the strategic or the new normal. So that is beyond April. And I'd encourage people to see the opportunity in this. There is going to need to be significant fiscal stimulus put forward. The construction and the infrastructure industries are going to be a big, big part of that. The key is going to be how we all work together collaboratively to look at the new normal, do this really rapidly. So we would advocate that some of the things that were done in Christchurch, for example, the idea of the 100-day blueprint plan that was collaboratively co-designed, that sort of approach needs to be looked at again as we look at the new normal. We're also advocating beyond projects for a big focus on program funding. And that is not normal for government. They normally like to say, we're going to do this project or that project. What we're talking about with program funding is that there are some critical areas. Those are things like water or hospitals or housing that we need to solve for nationally, but we don't know the exact answers. We're calling for a bucket of program funding to be made available in these sorts of critical areas, for co-design to happen, and for people to collaboratively work out exactly how to spend that money really well and for great outcomes. If we do that in an integrated way, there is the ability for us to solve for several problems at once, which is really critical. So climate change could be addressed at the same time as the need for quality housing, perhaps. Or water could be addressed at the same time as public health and hospitals can be addressed. So there is an ability, if we're bringing big fiscal stimulus, to make sure that we join up as an industry and get best bang for buck out of that. For service providers, I'd encourage you to understand that clients, particularly government departments, are going to be slightly overrun. They need arms and legs. But the old way of contracting you, of coming out and getting an architect or an engineer or a QS, perhaps needs to become, we're going to work on this particular program or project, and consortia are going to need to turn up and perhaps in-house themselves to the Ministry of Education or Justice or Kaingaora, for example. So think about that as a new way of contracting yourself out. We're well aware that local councils provide almost 40% of the infrastructure in New Zealand, and there have been long-term problems with funding to go to councils. We're also aware that they have projects that are available to go that are out there in the regions and that can be very helpful for smaller providers. So again, we're calling for support for councils so that they can get that project flow going very quickly. So I mentioned the RMA, the Public Works Act potentially needs to be amended through this process or facilitated. Jobs need to be a key outcome of this. So we are thinking that with additional fiscal stimulus, that the government's social procurement rules could be extended and enforced over a wider sector. And so that would encourage the right behaviours in terms of creating jobs, taking on apprenticeships, and making sure that the supply chain right through to small providers is fed through this extraordinary response that we need as well. So I'll finish there that saying that, you know, with huge amounts of risk, there is real opportunity for our sector. We are lucky in a way that we can help in the rebuilding of New Zealand. And we need to be supportive of a government that's working under extraordinary pressure at the moment, to have them run towards that risk and to see some of the things that we've talked about as trials. If we follow a trial on a new way of procurement and it works well, maybe that's the new way forward. So you all have a part to play in supporting those ideas. We still need to keep some of our organisations strategic. If you've got 100 people in your company, you'll be focused on cash flow in the near term. You will rapidly need to put some of those people towards thinking strategically about the new normal, about where you pivot and about how you innovate your business. We're having to do that in our business, and we're hearing it a lot, that those businesses that are going to do well are going to be the ones that innovate and respond, keep their people focused on the fact that this is a once in a lifetime chance to perhaps rebuild our system and to rebuild New Zealand in a different guise. Christchurch and Kaikoura have a lot of lessons for us. This is a resilience event and it's also a leadership event for us. So there are good lessons and bad lessons out of that. And also we're fighting a pandemic, which is not a physical event as an earthquake was. But likewise, I'd really encourage you, if you have a firm that is a presence in Christchurch, consider the lessons there. What was good or bad about the governance that was set up there? Did we have the right leadership? Did we have too many entities? Did we secure the program funding that we needed and therefore allow things to go ahead well? What was great about the co-design down there? So I'll finish talking. There is a lot of Q&A and we'll look forward to taking as many questions from you as come through. But I'd encourage you to reach out to us. We're all working from home. Thank God we invested in our last financial crisis in a really, really fantastic broadband network, one of our awarded projects at Infrastructure New Zealand. Just think about what the projects and legacy assets are that we might be able to build through this period of extraordinary times. So thank you very much. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Paul. That's some fantastic background for the industry, and we now would like to open for some questions. So if you haven't been on a webinar before, perhaps down at the bottom of your screen you can see a Q&A section. So feel free to write some questions to us there. We have got a couple ready to go now, and we've got some others that we've been emailed. But take this opportunity to send through your questions on Q&A. Just to let you know, we currently have over 585 people who registered to attend this webinar today. Unfortunately, we've only been able to accept the first 100. So we are recording the session today. We will be playing it live and providing it to our members. But we do hope you'll be able to join us at future webinars as we move forward. So Paul, the first question that we have for you is, how does the construction sector intend to want immediate starts for works when we're in a lockdown for the next 3 weeks minimum? Paul, perhaps you might like to outline to our listeners some of the international research we have been doing together with our members and our policy team about what comparative economies are doing with their construction sectors.
Sure. So at the moment, it looks like the best practice is actually coming out of Asia. So having been through MERS and SARS and other flu-like epidemics, they've actually acted really quickly. And what we're seeing there is high centralised government control, a feature that we have here, which is great. We're seeing technology solutions. So you must turn on the Bluetooth on your phone and you can set a geofence, for example, that alerts when you're within certain number of meters from another worker. We're seeing split shifts, enhanced hygiene and public health measures. So, for example, taking temperature checks onto and off sites, scrubbing in and scrubbing out in the same way that you would do for a hospital, for example. So we've leveraged our members that have international presence to do that. We've got about 20, 25 countries or regions that are featured in that. And again, through the sort of the collaborative co-work that is going on, MB has a lead in the definition of essential services, and they're receiving advice from the construction sector accord and across government. That includes the Ministry of Health. And we are feeding into that. So the second part I would say is that there is a discussion about pre-work that might need to be done. For example, do you need to send people out in advance of the 4 weeks to make sites safe and to allow a fast start? So that is being considered. I'm being clear that we fully support the lockdown, but we also, using Grant Robertson's idea of the economy being an oven rather than a light switch, we're well aware that to warm up our construction sector, we have to do some pre-work as well. The final one is potentially a very old school one from sort of Ministry of Works days, but potentially do we need to have construction workers volunteer to go and isolate in a workers' camp for a while and have those people work on site away from their family. And the final thing is that I think that all of this information needs to be made widely available and co-designed with workers. Workers are quite rightly scared, and there are some essential services workers that are scared to go to work at the moment because they don't have the information. So we need to do this with our people, not to them.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. We've certainly been grateful for the support of our members who have been helping us with that international matrix. Paul, we do have a number of questions, particularly in regard to support for subbies and for small companies. Can you give us a bit of an update on how the government is proposing to support that part of the sector?
Yeah, so this is a harder one. So I think the key is to get closer to those subbies. And so my comments about local government follow there. Local government is well across the regions and some of the smaller providers. So I would say that funding for the local government sector, where that aligns with national initiatives, is going to be quite important. There are also discussions going on with government, and this goes to the social procurement rules, about making sure that payments flow down through the chain. So for example, if you let a contract to build classrooms, should you require, for example, 30% local content in that region, as an example. So that's actively being looked at. Those government procurement rules, I think, are compulsory on central government. They are optional in normal times on local government. We are in a state of emergency, so I believe that central government can direct local government, but I think we're in a time when the carrot of additional funding could open that up significantly. The final one is that potentially in the housing space, history tells us that when the housing market goes off the boil, we drop our supply, and that has really poor long-term outcomes for the country. So I believe the lessons have gone through to Kāinga Ora that this is the time that you double down and you add capacity to the industry. And the other key is that Kāinga Ora should facilitate and not necessarily do all of that housing themselves. So that would provide opportunities and support packages. I know that HUD are considering what support packages Kāinga Ora and others could think about doing.
Thanks very much, Paul. I know in some of my conversations with members, the issue of traditional procurement has been raised. We have a question here. What changes in the government procurement system are seen as key to getting work flowing across the whole sector? Do you have any thoughts on what improvements we could expedite in that space?
So it's interesting hearing from some people. The Victoria Park Tunnel here in Auckland was procured in the financial crisis in 4 weeks, is my understanding. So I think that to change government procurement rules, which are there designed to protect value for money, is quite a big thing. So that needs to be done with full trust. So that's probably the first thing actually that's required, is that our government needs to move to the principles that the Construction Accord has, which is based on trust of the private sector. And the private sector needs to respond with exemplary behaviours around not taking advantage of that trust. I said before that this is going to be a generational shift in terms of the way that we invest. And so those good behaviours are going to be noticed. So everyone is talking about facilitated or accelerated procurement. How that happens, we haven't yet landed on that, but I would say that alliancing and cross-functional teams that take an open book approach, lean on relationships, and can be shown to deliver really, really well are probably part of the answer.
Thanks, Paul. Another question we have here, is the government considering construction workers for discretionary spending to be classified as essential workers, thereby enabling schooling and childcare? So I think really that comes back to our international research, how we look at staging the lifting of the lockdown, and whether we ring fence some projects or some regions in New Zealand to reduce the COVID alert from 4 to 3, allowing some projects to get underway. Paul, what were your thoughts in this space?
Yeah, so MB is the holder of the definition of essential, and you've already seen it even yesterday, or it might have been today, that they've changed that definition again to broaden the amount of goods that people can buy from online retailers, for example. So it is actively being looked at. The difficulty is, as we know, is that no one construction site is the same. So it is complex out there, and to some extent it needs to be delegated closer to the businesses that can own and control that. That is a complex process, but it's being worked on around the clock. Rest assured that we're putting our ideas in as well about how we can get the right balance, because this is the right balance between public health and individual wealth. And that is really, really important to make sure that we get the right balance. We do not want to be the US, where construction is open and actually they've lost public mandate for construction to be open because it is part of the health problem. There is a win-win in here, but we've also got to recognise that people are working around the clock on that. And I would strongly hope that we have clarity well inside the lockdown on that.
Thanks, Paul. We have a little bit of concern from one of our attendees who's asked, will the COVID-19 response from government in terms of economic stimulus eat into available budgets for infrastructure spending, or are infrastructure budgets ring-fenced and secured? Can you fill us in on your meeting yesterday with the Construction Sector Accord around this?
Yeah, so the Construction Sector Accord is obviously a closed working group, so I can talk in more generalities, but it was pretty clear right back from Grant Robertson's announcement that the New Zealand Upgrade Program, for example, the $12 billion was a ring-fenced program. I've heard absolutely nothing that suggests that that is under threat, and every discussion I've had is about funding on top. So I think members should be fairly comfortable that what we're talking about is additional funding, not a reduction in funding, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Great, thanks Paul, glad we didn't rob you. The question that I get every single day from my in-depth telephone interviews Is there any work being done to develop new COVID-19 contract conditions, for example, NZ 3910? Where are we at with that? Because it's really inflicting a lot of pain on a lot of organisations right now.
Yeah, so again, I'd go back to, first of all, with existing 3910 contracts, unfortunately, there is no such thing as a standard 3910 contract. Again, I point to our advocacy is to have an equally blunt statement come over the top that clarifies the legal and contractual position for all of government towards the private sector, and to make it clear under what conditions money can be claimed. So that's the back book, if you like, of contracts. And I know that is being worked on, is to give clarity, and I am hopeful that that might be before the end of this week. So that'll be critical to secure the cash for the current situation. Going forward, I would expect that procurement simply can't be the drawn out 9-month, 12-month process, competitive bid process. And I am aware that there is both public and private sector active tenders that have been pulled back, which are causing concern in the market at the moment. Again, in the UK and in other places, there has been a positive statement out of government that procurement should continue and in fact be accelerated. So we would love to see a positive statement along that line.
Great, thanks Paul. We have a specific question here. What are the 3 top rated scale projects which will create the most jobs?
That's a really good question. It's not actually in my bailiwick, but I'd again hasten to add that the Infrastructure Commission is part of this overall piece. Now, the Infrastructure Commission is quite early on there, but their people are all over this, so they're building their thoughts into this process. Crown Infrastructure Partners, again, look at their website. They are coordinating all of these so-called shovel-ready or able to be shovel-ready projects for acceleration and considering those within the next 180 days. So I'm aware that letters will have gone out to 60 or 70 at least CEOs in our sector. And so that should be pretty widely known at the senior exec level, but to give comfort to the wider industry, there's certainly a dialogue going on about accelerating projects where possible.
Great. Well, look, thanks very much, Paul. I'm going to draw those questions to a close right now. What we're going to do right now is wrap up our session today with some closing questions from Paul, where to from next, and also a reminder for all of you, Infrastructure New Zealand is here to help you. Please make sure if you have feedback, comments or suggestions for what we can be doing and how we can be advocating at this time, you send them through to me or through to Paul or through to anybody that you know at the team. So Paul, some final wrap-up words from you. Where to from here now for a sector that's hurting pretty hard at the moment?
Yeah, so the first thing is to stabilise, right? So we need to find conditions, and I'm very confident that the government is working extremely hard on this and collaboratively on this. So I would hope that there would be clarity on that. I would hope before the end of the week in terms of the cash and contractual situation for our industry. I think the key thing to focus on for the medium term as we go through the end of April is the Crown infrastructure process of what can be accelerated. That's the place where people should collaboratively go together and innovate in the ways that we could bring projects forward to market. And the third piece is to keep part of your team strategic. What we learn from Christchurch earthquake type events or Nectar is that we're in a fight or flight response at the moment. We understand that your families, your jobs, your businesses are under some severe stress. But if you have 100 people in your company, make sure that you keep 5 to 10 or 15 of those people out to think about the new normal. Make sure that you build relationships and get ready, because our industry is in that favourable position that once we shore up our cash flow, there should be significant opportunities. And it will be a once in a generational opportunity to contribute to the new New Zealand that we want. So I'll just finish with that. I think that in risk, there is huge opportunity. I'd ask you to hang in there and to keep in contact with us. and we're here for you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Thank you for joining us today. If you were one of the lucky 100 to get through, I'm sorry we disappointed 485 other people, but we will be sending out a recording of this webinar. And once again, please do send your feedback, your comments, or your suggestions through to Infrastructure New Zealand. Thanks very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Goodbye. Kia kaha.